And hello, everybody. I'm just struck. Usually we're telling people turn your video on, and now we're saying make sure you turn yours off. Okay, so happy to be with you tonight. Very excited to be moderating a conversation about the process that went into the creation of the Trustworthy Elections report. We're going to assume you've at least glanced at the report. We're not going to go through it in detail. But there'll be a kind of a summary of the process of the creation of it. So we'll have some intros of our four panel members, two reds and two blues, who are the four kind of core leaders of a group of 12, and then hundreds of people who participated in workshops over some period of time. And so I'll be asking them some questions about the kind of inside process, what they learned, what was important, how this got together, this report. So a series of questions, and then we asked people who signed up for this conversation, this fireside chat, to send in questions, and so kind of pulled together some themes of questions that a number of you sent in, and I'll be posing those. And then we will finish up with some question about what this experience has meant to these folks who have led it. And then a little bit of business, and then we will finish up. So I'm going to welcome now our four participants for this fireside chat who will now come on the screen with me. And there's Rena. Ta-da. This is sort of like coming on stage one at a time. Okay. And then Walt. All right. Welcome. And there should be two more. Boom, boom. You know, the suspense continues as we see who comes on the screen next. Okay, it's Elizabeth. All right. And then Larry should be joining us. All right, Larry. All right, so we're the group here for this fireside chat, and we're going to begin with introductions. So, so your name, where you live, you're leaning red or blue, your role in the campaign, and reason you joined, all briefly. Walt, I'm going to start with you.
Thank you. Walt McKee. I live here in Montgomery County, Maryland. I am the red-leaning co-chair of this effort, and I joined up because I want peace and prosperity for everyone. I want people to be happy, and I love working with my fellow Americans, and this was an opportunity to do it.
Okay, Rena.
Hey, so I'm Rena Bernards. Despite my shirt, I lean blue. I'm here in Maryland, in the same county that Walt is in. And, you know, I'm a family therapist like you, Bill, and I love the part of Braver Angels where we talk across ideological lines and get to mess it up and really think how other people, really hear how other people think. But in my background, I'm also a community organizer, and the opportunity to take, to find consensus and see if we can find a way to actually affect policy was very exciting to me. So.
Hey, Elizabeth.
My name is Elizabeth Dahl. I'm the director of the Braver Politics program at Braver Angels, and I live just outside Seattle in a place called Bainbridge Island. I lean red, and I joined the Trustworthy Elections campaign and leadership team because I've worked in politics for a very long time. And become convinced through that the most significant cause of political polarization at the individual level is institutional distrust. And because I've worked in politics, it's really super important to me that Americans believe the processes associated with and outcomes of elections are trustworthy. When people distrust election outcomes, processes, and the people involved in them, they become conspiratorial, both among blues and reds, feel disenfranchised by the system, and tend to become more willing to weaponize the government against their political opponents or to turn to violence to influence the outcomes. And to me, that's an absolute worst case scenario. And I believe that our trustworthy elections work can mitigate and prevent those outcomes.
Okay, Larry.
Yes, hi, my name is Larry Mays. I live in Boston. I lead Blue. I'm the co-chair of this effort. The reason why I joined and got involved in a deep way and long journey, if you will, is because I really want this country, this democracy to continue, not only for my kids, but also for my grandkids. And I was so moved by the process and how important this was to me. I even took the time to write a book to my grandkids to memorialize it. So this effort means a lot to me, and it's heartfelt, and was great to do this with people that are also dedicated to seeing this democracy continue.
Right. Well, I'm inspired to hear what you've said. And so next, Rena's going to walk us through what happened here. What did you do? Why did you do it? Just a little bit of the story behind this report.
Okay, there is quite a story, and I'll try to get as much out of it as I can. I really think this is groundbreaking for Braver Angels. We answered the question of what's next after we've talked to each other and debated each other. What's next? And I think we really took a step in trying to answer that question. We created something, and I'm toying with this phrase. We created a citizens think tank. So none of us are experts in elections. We had hundreds of participants across the country, if you include our participants in our workshops, and the moderators and the observers and the organizers and the the Zoom people, everybody else. We had tremendous numbers of participants in this process, which was very exciting. And the report that we came out with, I think, can be a blueprint for rebuilding trust in our electoral system. So to tell you the story, I have to go back to the first Common Ground workshop. A group in Grants Pass, Oregon, requested that I build a workshop so that they can tackle the issue of abortion. Pro-choice and pro-life people come together and talk about abortion. And so with Bill's support and encouragement, I created the Common Ground Single Issue Workshop. The goal of the workshop is for equal numbers of people on both sides of an issue to search for where there is agreement in values, concerns, and solutions. A little known fact, I borrowed the exercise that's the key thing in the Common Ground workshop from an exercise I created years before for a group of Jewish and Palestinian women leaders. And I figured if it worked there, maybe it'll work on abortion. Both very difficult issues. So the key to the workshop is that all agreements have to be unanimous, and that any one person can veto a point. And I think this creates a tremendous amount of safety, because nobody feels like they're being pushed into something that they can't agree to. So after this success in Oregon, we formalized the workshop with the help of a lot of Braver Angel participants and Zoom people. Got a lot of help in formalizing this. And alliances began to use it to delve into such issues as teaching race and racism in the public schools, guns, healthcare, anti-Semitism, and other concerns. One day, almost exactly 2 years ago, I got a phone call from David Blankenhorn, the president of Braver Angels. He was on his cell phone walking around Boston. And he said, Rena, nobody trusts elections, nobody. And if we don't have trust in our elections, we have nothing. I've been meeting with a group here, and I know you have this Common Ground workshop. What if we brought together conservatives who thinks there's voter fraud with liberals who think there's voter suppression? What would happen? And I said, I don't know. I don't know what would happen. So he said, let's do it. Let's do this workshop all over the country, and then we'll publicize the results. So we were off and running. Our first workshop that we did was in Boston, and that's where I met Larry. And we held 26 of these workshops around the country, involving hundreds of people with equal number of reds and blues. And these workshops produced a total of 727 points of agreement on values, concerns, and solutions. Meanwhile, we put together a fabulous, balanced red-blue leadership team to oversee this campaign. And it really has been a joy to work together. There are times we were meeting twice a month on Zoom. We really took control of the project, and that was great joy. Finally, we all met in November in Boston, and with Bill moderating, we hammered out agreements to 23 solutions to the issue of rebuilding trust in elections. These 23 solutions were informed by what the workshop folks were telling us. So we took all of that data and said, okay, what really rose to the top in terms of importance? Frequency mentioned, agreements across reds and blues. And we underscored 3 values. The first is that voting should be easy, cheating should be hard. Secondly, every citizen should have an equal say in who will govern them through free and fair elections. And finally, the American government will fail if candidates refuse to accept any outcome other than victory. So there was unanimity in our team on those 3 values. After Boston, we assigned a writing team, and we were all really pleased with the results. And we are very proud of what we've accomplished.
All right. So the next question or topic for us to talk about is a point that you felt that your group, your political persuasion, red or blue, a point that you yielded ground on, because this is a report that is everybody agreed to, and therefore everybody yielded something. Everybody got something, and everybody yielded something. Okay, ended up changing in some way. And so this question is, what did you yield on? Why, and how do you feel about doing that? Okay, and so I'm going to start with the reds, and Walt, do you want to tee that up for us?
Yes, thank you very much. In my case, my blue compadres here were very interested in having Election Day be a holiday. We're talking about for national elections. And I didn't really, I had no enthusiasm for it, but we followed the Braver Angels way, and we sat quietly and we listened. And it became apparent to me that you need not only the technical aspects of election process to be trustworthy, but you also need the spirit of the election process to be embraced. And I felt that this was clearly something very important to them. And I wanted them to feel like I was coming through for them. And I saw it doing no harm. And so that's an example of where we worked our way through the Brave Angels process to what we took to calling a collaborative consensus. It wasn't just cutting a deal. It was coming to understand where our fellows were coming from, seeing what was important, seeing what we could both live with in a positive way. So that's what I have to offer there.
Yeah, and Walt, just to follow up, because I know a collaborative consensus is a big thing for you. And whenever some of us putting this together use some other phrase, you said, no, remember, we agreed it's collaborative consensus. So say a few more words about that.
Yeah, it's, in politics, they say that compromise is the name of the game. We wanted more of a a tighter mind meld here, where we were coming through not just cutting a deal, but we had a common mind, almost a unanimity. And so that's why we used the Braver Angels mindset of listening out to the other person and seeing if we could get past our own cut and dried, this is important, this isn't. We're also human beings. And so we were listening carefully to what the other side said without making faces, without jumping in and rolling our eyes or anything like that, but sincerely listening. You know, this process is a process of trust. And trust comes from mutually positive shared experiences. And we had many of those over time, and we wanted to build on them. And this collaborative consensus building was a rolling series of shared positive experiences. And that is really why I think we were able to achieve what we did.
Thank you. So Elizabeth, yielding, what did you yield on, and talk about why?
It's something that we ended up talking about for quite some time in Boston was the concept of redistricting and what that should look like versus what it currently looks like. It may not surprise many people to know that we all agreed that political gerrymandering is a very bad thing, as did many of our different workshop groups. This was a point of commonality that was expressed again and again and again. The question was, what do you do about it? And there were a lot of disagreements around that. Something that was interesting that we were able to yield on was ensuring that there should be no current elected officials on an independent redistricting commission. We found some common ground on the idea that an independent commission should exist. You'll notice something that we didn't find, which is what that independent commission should look like exactly. We weren't able to compromise on what the ideal form of an independent commission would be, but we could agree that commissions should not include currently elected officials. And we were able to find agreement around prioritizing the 4 C's of compactness. That is, districts should be populations within districts should be reasonably compact. You should have density of population within them. Competitiveness, that is, that you should have districts where reds and blues have a more difficult race against each other. And contiguity, which is just that the districts should be, as much as possible, one single body. They shouldn't have really weird shapes. They shouldn't wrap around an area that is either more red or more blue. And compliance with the Voting Rights Act of 1965. It is actually often difficult to get either reds or blues to agree to these 4 C's, because something that often happens in states that are more red or more blue is that it helps incumbents to have gerrymandering. And so whether that gerrymandering benefits one side or the other, it ultimately happens primarily to reelect incumbents. So I was really happy that we were able to find places where we could give and places where we could come together. And so this is a really good example of how our work could form a strong recommendation and simultaneously respect differences among us.
Okay. And Larry, would you tee up one on your side? What was challenging to yield on?
Oh, for me, on the blue side was definitely Bill voter ID. There's a very deep history in this country of of voter suppression. And that goes, if you just start from the Civil War on down, right? And not just its impact of African Americans or people of color. There's been suppression against Asians, there's been suppression against Mexicans. There's been suppressions of everyone or anyone who did not own land, right? Regardless of your color. So America has a very deep history when it comes to voter suppression. However, I think there is also an understanding, at least today, that we want elections to be fair, but without cheating, right? And so when you look at polls, particularly from Gallup to Mammoth, whatever poll you look at, UMass Amherst poll, most Americans support voter ID, right? And I think given the flavor of where the country is today, I think it's actually not that big a step, although we're still dealing with the reality, if you will, of the pressures and the history of voter suppression in this country. But I think most Americans today recognize that if we can do it, we should, in terms of providing some form of ID across the board, if you will, and that is recognized and that deals with the issue of it's being easy and it being without cheating.
Okay. And Raina, you want to follow up on that?
Sure. Same issue. Voter ID. So I do think there are parts of this country that use voter ID as a form of voter suppression. I think that's going on. And I'll give a small example that I noticed. I was doing get out the vote phone calls to another state, and I got an elderly disabled woman on the phone who said she couldn't get to the polls. And I said, well, why don't you apply for an absentee ballot? And she said, I tried and I got on computer and then they asked me to upload my picture ID. And, you know, I don't know about you, but I'm very savvy with computers. You have to be a moderator in Braver Angels. But when I'm asked to upload a picture ID, I get the heebie-jeebies and usually has me running to the room to get my husband, IT department, to help me out. So I do think that it suppresses that particular example, disabled people, people that don't have computer knowledge, poor people that don't have the equipment, and so forth. So why did I agree to this? We did not just say voter picture ID. That isn't what the plank says. It says, first of all, it's the responsibility of the government to supply every eligible voter with a voter ID, picture or non-picture. So the fact that the option of non-picture is there is what enabled me to vote for this. And I have a little voter registration card I keep in my wallet. It's from my county. And I think that would be an easy way for the government to supply everybody with an ID. Could have a barcode, doesn't have to have a picture. And I think that given how rare instances of fraud are, and given how people feel, you know, one thing I learned from the workshops, it's not just what I think. What I learned from the workshops is kind of Larry saying, people feel that you should have to identify yourself when you get to the polls. There's just a gut level feeling. And what I learned from these workshops is that's true for blues too. Many of our blues believe that. So we came up with something that I thought I could live with, and we'll see what happens.
Okay. Okay.
I want to say one thing, Bill, which is that what we came up with in this report is just the 12 of us. And Braver Angels as a national organization doesn't sign on to this. No member, even if you participated in the workshops, we're not assuming that you sign on to this. This is a springboard for discussion. That's what we're hoping we did. Start a discussion.
Yeah. So that's important as people listening in, watching in, maybe wondering if you're a Brave Angels member, Does this mean that Braver Angels is signed on for voter ID or a certain approach to redistricting? And this is not the Braver Angels document. This is the document that came out of this group of people who worked together so long and hard, and Braver Angels supporting this process. Rather than Braver Angels is not going to be going out and going state by state and saying there should be voter ID or this approach to redistricting. So it's important just for people to know that. Okay, so next is a point that you were pleasantly surprised that folks on the other side came your way, that they yielded ground on. So the first question was, what did you yield ground on? And this is what were you struck that, hey, those folks were willing to bend a bit too? So we'll start with the blues this time. So Larry, what stood out to you?
What stood out to me was an agreement, if you will, or a collaborative consensus agreement around a national election, that election should be a national holiday. I was kind of somewhat shocked by that. And, a couple of reasons. One, I think mainly from the commerce sector of the country, that there would be lots of pushback from that in terms of, when there's a holiday or when there's a day off, in more cases than not, the commerce sector does not make money, right? And, as when I was a kid, stores were not open on Sundays, right? You had to do everything by Saturday, and eventually we saw that went by the boards because it was, Sunday became like any other day to make money. So anyway, I was really surprised by that portion, but also I was also surprised in looking at some of the data that had made an assumption that most Reds, if you will, were not supportive. And I found in the data that that's not quite true. That there seems to be more than 50% of Reds who actually believe that there should be some kind of national holiday when it comes to an election day. So anyway.
Yeah, so you went into the process with some assumptions that something like this would be maybe a no-go. And you found not only in this process that more Reds than you expected were okay with it, but when you look at the data, that they weren't that far off from most Reds.
And Bill, interesting, my wife tells me all the time that I make big assumptions. So I've learned that I had another one I had to deal with.
Who would have thought? Who would have thought? Yes. So thank you. So Irina, for you?
So for me, one of the things that surprised me was no excuse absentee ballot. So we said that all voters should have the option of asking for an absentee ballot with no excuse needed. And just streamlining that process, I think can bring many more people into the voting system. And the mail by ballot and everything seems to be controversial within the conservative community. So I was actually very pleased that we achieved that consensus.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Pleased and a little surprised?
Yeah, and a little surprised.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, so Elizabeth, how about for you? What struck you? What surprised you?
So actually, reference to what Rena just talked about with the no excuse needed absentee ballots, I was surprised by the consensus on balloting chain of custody and filming of both drop boxes for ballots and the actual elections process. For me, it was that enabled me to find consensus on the no excuse needed absentee ballot. Chain of custody is a really important piece to me for security.
Spell that out a little bit for people who may not know the term or may not be up on it.
So when you have a lot of absentee ballots coming and going, it's easy for processes that are really decentralized across the country and managed at the county level to cause irregularities and cause suspicion when processes are different. So it's really important to me to see adoption of universal practices, at least across the state, so that people can reliably expect to recognize what should happen to their ballot is what is happening to their ballot, and also be able to track their ballot to an extent when it is mailed by the county, whether it's mailed by the county, and when it's received by the county, and then watch some of the counting process. I think that that's incredibly important for transparency, for trust, and for security. And so I was really, really surprised because of kind of the preconceptions that I came into this with about Blue's concerns that voter fraud wasn't real and that we shouldn't be concerned about people's concerns about fraud and we shouldn't really treat this with much seriousness. I was really impressed with the degree to which they were willing to put into place consensus on various chain of custody pieces and ensuring that the processes and the systems behind absentee ballots are really, really strong and consistent.
Yeah, and you said that this gave you more space and to accept some other, to yield on some other things like the holiday. So it's a beautiful example of what Larry was talking about before, and also Walt, that when you have the sense that people are taking your concerns seriously and not blowing them off, because it strikes me that's part of what's happened in this whole election thing is people, no, that's not true, that's not true. And then why would I accommodate if you're not even taking my concerns seriously? Yeah, okay. Walt, how about you?
Well, when I was being listened to, it was my perception that they didn't, my blue comrades were hesitant about the idea of the cameras recording the custody and the status of the ballots. And what I said was I compared it to, and this with all due respect to everyone, police corruption and fighting police corruption and police abuse. I think that the number one tool in the history of policing to protect civilians and to protect police is the camera. Not just the cell phone cameras of your civilians on the streets, but the cameras on the bodies of the police, on the dashboards of the police cars. When someone is arrested and taken back to the police station for processing, there's cameras in every corner. And you can watch videos on YouTube of the entire process and chain of custody of someone being pulled over, the conversation, and you can see with crystal clarity, is this person being treated properly? And if not, you can see that there's going to be accountability because it's public information. And the police cameras are not just protecting the civilian, they're protecting the police force. The police officers, as they're doing their job, they know that they can't be accused of something that they didn't do. If they do a good job, it's in front of the camera for all to see. And likewise, the idea of the cameras is not to show a disrespect for the job being done for election workers, taking the ballots to the warehouse and counting them in whatever process they do. It's to protect them as much as anything, just like you want to have, protection for, people in any circumstance. Anyway, my fellows on this committee came to see that, what I was saying was not just the logistics that we were concerned about, but it's kind of like lawyers are supposed to avoid impropriety and the appearance of impropriety. This was an attempt to avoid both impropriety and the appearance of it to make life easier on everyone who was working on this process.
And you felt heard on that?
I felt very heard. And I'm here to tell you that the people on that committee and these people that you see on the screen here are among my very favorite people, because we've shown each other courtesy and respect, and we've accomplished what we set out to accomplish. And I like them very much.
And I'm sure they like you too, Walt. Okay. Rena, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I was remembering what you said, Bill, of your observation of the way we work together, and you had a great analogy.
Yeah.
You can tell it.
Yeah. So I came in late in this process, facilitated the all-day meeting to try to hammer out the 22 agreements on solutions, and I was so glad I did, because what I saw was people who did not necessarily think that the other group's concerns were that big. Okay. Say, well, it's a concern to you. And the analogy that Rena's referred to that I thought of is like in a marriage. Like if I think we live in a safe neighborhood and we don't need a lot of, we don't need alarms and all that in our house, but my wife feels, if she feels differently, in other words, if she feels less secure, well, what's it going to do for me to say, when was the last burglary in our neighborhood? Okay, let me show you the stats here. Okay, that just as she will sometimes yield to my concerns, even if she doesn't 100% think they're completely valid, well then, I yield to hers. And so this is part of getting along together, and in this case, having a family, having a household together. And that was what occurred to me there. And it's not, and nobody yielding on something that is a core value, a core conviction, a core principle, but saying, hey, this is important to you, and there's a way for me to hold on to my values and principles, and to respond to your concern, then with the hope that you'll reciprocate. So that's what came to me that day.
I think that's on target.
Okay. So next thing is, we've been talking about how gloriously wonderful you all fell in love with each other and produced this report that's going to change the world and all that sort of thing. I hear tell it was actually a hard process at times. So that's what we're going to talk about now. What was hard? What was difficult? What was challenging about this? And Walt, we'll let you go first on this one.
Well, part of it was it took a lot of time. And most of the time that we met, it had to be something like 6 or 7 o'clock at night, which made sense from the standpoint that, everybody had their 9-to-5 job and that sort of thing. But that's also, in my household, prime time, dinner time, family time, and that sort of thing. And this was one of the first bonding things that Larry and I had, because we're both family men, and we had someone back home saying, who are these people? Who are these trustworthy election people? Why they meet so much, but and now we go back and we count. It was only about 13 years that we've been working on this. I guess really 2.
Well, you were just a teenager, I think, at the time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But basically, it takes a lot of time listening. It takes a lot of time scheduling. It takes a lot of time taking it in, and of course there was meetings offline between subsets, trying to accomplish something to bring back to the big meeting to be considered. So I would say that the flat out volume of time that we had to dedicate to this, week in, month in, year in, and we had a deadline. We wanted to make a difference in 2024, and be ready for that. And there's a point at which it's like when you're selling the house. The day comes, the house has got to be cleared out. Things have got to be ready. We had to be ready. And that's partly what that November meeting with you did for us. And retroactively, thank you again for your leadership at that time.
Cracking the whip.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So Irina, what was hard for you?
So I think what was hard was that this has never been done before. And David Blankenhorn came up with a great phrase. We're building the plane while we're in the air. And it really felt like that so often. We took a number of wrong turns and had to steer the plane back. But once we got back on course, it was clear sailing until the next time it happened. But
Some inside humor here that we will not share with everybody.
but it was creative. It was very creative. We had to create this thing that had never happened before. So
Yeah. Larry, how about for you?
Yeah, no, it was as Walt and others have alluded to, it was arduous, man. It was hard stuff. And divorce was quite certain at certain times. But we pressed through. But I think, I mean, I'm so used to having staff to do what I need to get done. Staff are amazing, especially a talented staff, to get hard things done and on time. And so, there were several times we had to bow to reality in terms of deadlines, right? That was one issue that came up over and that no, this can't be done in 2 months, can't be done in 3 months, because you have to accommodate schedules and that kind of thing. And God bless Bill Carberry, and the man took extreme abuse in terms of keeping us on track, even when it came to meeting times, right? And so, and beyond that was how do you how are you sure in the midst of the process that it's all going to be worth it? Right. At least for me, there were several points where, I'm weighing what I've got going on in my personal life, my professional life, and I'm doing this volunteer effort. And and I have to remind myself that it's worth it because of my kids and my grandkids. But you have to be, it's hard, right? When you have to give up even some potential paying a light bill, as I joke, in terms of a consulting opportunity, because you're in the middle of this thing, right? And so, those are the times. There were some dark times for me in terms of time, right? Can I do this, right? And so, these folks, Walt and Rena and Bill and Elizabeth, really helped to push it along because I saw their dedication to the efforts, so it made it worth it.
And no guarantees of success, Larry. That's the other thing you said. I mean, we're looking back on it now, and it really looks successful, but it wasn't clear this could be pulled off.
That's right. I agree. It was,
and that Rena said this. You were creating something from scratch, and the first airplane. I'm sure the Wright brothers probably, the first ones didn't fly, but right. This one has flown, but there was no guarantee.
Yeah, Bill, a lot of times there's a lot of we have a fabulous U.S. military. We talk about the volunteer army, but they volunteer to join it, but they get paid. This is
Larry, the check, you've not been getting the checks? Really? Oh, I'm so sorry.
The check was not in the mail.
I think they went to a different address. Oh, we'll straighten that out. We'll straighten that out later, because the others, yeah. So, Elizabeth, what was hard for you?
For me, a lot of it was once we got to the point of meeting in Boston in person and arguing about what was actually going to be in the report and how, trying to decide which of the pieces were my hills to die on and which were the pieces that I wasn't as dedicated to holding out on, and which pieces I was actually fairly apathetic or could be conciliatory on. And that takes a lot of thoughtful discernment, because everybody has different hills to die on. And there's a little bit of give and take, as you mentioned earlier. But something that I really want to emphasize here is that we all had quote unquote red lights, as we called them, places where we couldn't find compromise, places where we felt really, really strongly we needed to stand on principle. And we did. But there were other places, and there are always other places in the, whether you call it an art or a skill of policy making, there are always places where you don't feel as strongly, where there are what we would call yellow lights or green lights. And we were able to respect other people's red lights and say, okay, maybe this red light is a green light for me, and maybe this red light for you is a yellow light for me. On the flip side, there were times where we said, nope, we actually can't come to agreement on this. And we can't find common ground. This is not going to make it into the report. So for me, that was the hardest part, was deciding which points were going to be my hills to die on, and where I was able to find common ground and or give a little bit, be a yellow light or a green light to someone else's really strong concern. As you said earlier, even if I didn't share it.
Yeah, and so having been part of that last meeting, we for each solution, we said, raise your hand if you're green light, yellow light, red light. And there were a few times when it was like 11 greens, and a red or yellow. And one of the things I was so impressed with the group doing is affirming that, because you can get a group dynamic that, just yield because, we all like each other and we have to get out of here. We have planes to catch, whatever. But it was really important to affirm anybody who is not a green. These were all greens at the end, and there were some that fell off. And just to affirm that's the discernment is about conscience here, right? As well as much as wanting to collaborate. But and I love your image of what hill you're going to die on and which not. So I was really privileged to watch that process. Okay, so Irina, I think a lot of folks are wondering what's next with this, and what can people do with this? What's going to happen with this report? So you want to talk about that?
Right, and I think it's two-pronged. One is we'd love people to use this as a springboard for conversation. So talk about it within your alliance. What parts do you like? What don't you like? What do you wish was in there? What's something that's you all can coalesce around? And to do it braver networks, we'd love to have those conversations happening within your organizations as well. And then the other thing is we want people to help get the word out. So can your alliance speak publicly about it? Can you send a red and blue team to a church and say, hey, this is a man bites dog story. Reds and blues agree on electoral reform. You want to hear about it from a red and a blue. Create a program like that. Contact your local media, because Elizabeth just said she called a conservative radio station in the Washington area, and they were interested. And so she and Bill Carberry are going to go on as a red blue team. This is the kind of thing that we really hope local people and local alliances will do. So there's the media, there's speaking to the public, and politicians. Get this out to your local politicians. They're the ones that can implement these things. So call for a meeting with them. This would be the best way to use this report. And again, you don't have to support everything here. You can go in and say, we want to talk about these 3 points, however it is that you want to do it. but we think getting the report out into the media will create the impression that there are reds and blues that really want to see action on this, that there's agreement about certain ideas involving hundreds of people who have listened to each other. And that's how we'd like to move forward.
Yeah, and for people to get the sense of the process here as well as the specifics. Because I think if folks just say, well, here's a list of policies and which ones you like or which you don't, that's not going to also capture, that's not the man bites dog, okay? Because
Right.
it's the process that you guys have been talking about here that is really distinctive. Many of these points could have come out of a think tank somewhere, okay, where they got together policy wonks, to come up with some compromises, and that's fine. But this is a bottom-up process that they've been through, and so people really being able to communicate that as well as the specifics seems to be really important.
And to say one more thing about that, if you took a poll of reds and blues in the public, there probably wouldn't be this kind of agreement. This is about what happens when reds and blues actually sit down and listen to each other and hear each other's concerns. And that's why it's something totally different than other ways to figure out where reds and blues stand.
And so, Walt, what was your phrase again for this process?
Collaborative consensus.
Yeah, which is very different from polling.
Very
Yes.
different. Very different. And again, our committee was informed by the unanimous points of agreement put forward by those workshops around the country.
Yeah, we really have to keep that in mind. In fact, part of what I recall at that final meeting is you were trying to be true to what came out of that process and to not engage things that sort of popped up at the end, like somebody in the group of 12, like, what about this? And I remember, Irina, a few times, and maybe others did as well, but you were sitting next to me, and I remember this saying, that really did not come out of these workshops. And this might be a cool idea, Walt, hey, you and I, over lunch, we could come up with another thing that's not there. That would not have been true to the process. So that kind of discipline, you were representing hundreds of people here and not just yourselves.
And just to let you know about the effort in Boston that you were a part of, that came to be known as our Boston language. And so as we met in the months after that Boston meeting, and so we decided that was kind of our legislative session. We had everybody in the room. Everybody had an opportunity to object and say why and that sort of thing. And so when it came to those points of agreement that came out of Boston, we stuck with that. And we had some occasional things where someone felt strongly after the fact about we should include this or change it in this way. And that was also part of our collaboration process because we would listen. Larry and I, as the co-chairs, would listen. And then we'd come back and say, but we've made this decision and we need to stick. Now, sometimes we had to take another 15, 20, 30 minutes as different people tried to be supportive or say whatever, and they needed to say whatever they had to say. And they needed to know that we listened.
That's right.
But in the end, if it was part of our Boston language, we needed to press forward.
That's right.
And that was, you asked what was hard.
Yeah.
That was one of the hard things.
Yeah, Larry, you're nodding like crazy there.
Oh, yes. Walt is right on point. It was, every one of the folks who were involved in this were very serious people, right? And they had very serious concerns, weren't flighty, and to say that, look, we've decided this, we're done, if you will, on this particular point, was very hard, right? Very hard to do. But Walt was quite right in that, look, if it took another hour or two just to listen to hear someone out, right? That was the respect I thought each person deserved, given what they were involved in, to be heard, right? But at the end of the day, there was a process, that we had to stick to and that we had agreed to do in Boston. And yeah, but Walt has characterized it. I couldn't improve on that at all.
Yeah, that's quite beautiful, because if you had just said, hey, that was Boston and we're not changing Boston, you would have been technically right and have lost the other person. Yeah. Yeah. And you mean it wasn't just perfect after I was finished with you guys? I'm stunned and shocked,
Yes, it was.
Oh,
But we
thank
had
you.
to
Thank
still
you.
talk about it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I didn't want to hear that it was still hard after that. Okay, but moving right along. So we're going to do some questions. So there were a lot of questions that came from folks, and thank you all for sending yours in. There were a number of questions about the voter ID issue, which is not surprising. And so I'm gonna just read several sentences here that capture a number of concerns, and then ask for responses. So voter ID poses many problems. How do you propose getting ID to each person eligible to vote? How can we avoid excluding vulnerable people? Photo IDs discourage people from voting. Groups like the League of Women Voters oppose required ID. So respond to that, Rena.
So the problem is that voter ID sounds like photo ID. People get that mixed up.
Right.
We did not demand a photo ID for when you go to the poll. When you go to the poll, we said the government should provide you something, doesn't have to be a photo, that says you are eligible to vote. And like I said, it could have a barcode on it. I think in the report, we also say maybe people could have a PIN. The PIN could be their address, the number of their address. There's lots of creative ways. And we also said that you can have an alternative ID, that this doesn't have to be the only one. So I think if we don't focus on the photo piece, then I think there is a way that vulnerable populations will not be excluded.
Mhm.
And also in a positive way, I've heard the reference to America being the laboratory of democracy or something like that. Different states, different regions will have different cultures and different needs and different ways to approach this over time. And we respect that. We're not dictating an approach here. We're seeing what we feel is a need, and we're calling upon the states to figure out what works for them.
Yeah, Elizabeth.
Rena makes an excellent point that we did not actually say that photo ID is required. And so I do want to emphasize that first off. And secondly, that governments would issue these IDs and they would be required for voting. I think that governments are perfectly able to do, state governments and county governments are perfectly able to do that. If they can mail you an absentee ballot, if they can mail you your driver's license, if they can mail you your voter registration card, they can certainly mail you an ID for the purposes of voting. Another thing that I wanted to highlight is that I think some people don't necessarily know is that there is actually more recent data on this. The University of Maryland did an interesting study in 2020 that found just 3% of voting age Americans don't have a non-expired government issued photo ID. The study didn't ask why that 3% lacked non-expired government ID or how many of those were eligible voters. And I would just point out that more than 3% of the population is actually non-citizens and eligible to vote, ineligible to vote for that reason. So I think that to an extent also it's helpful to know that fewer Americans lack an ID than I think some people think about.
Okay, and Larry, I want to give you the last word on this one.
Yeah, no, I just think also in the report, it is true. We put the onus, if you will, on Rena's right, it's voter ID, government issued, right? But in the instance of where that is not available, we would hope that someone could vote, right? If they were eligible, and they would have to show some kind of photo ID, I think, if that is the case.
Okay, okay. So the next question, it has to do with the election day holiday. And so this one says, the report says that some states limit early voting for, quote, political reasons. Wouldn't it be easier to fix that problem rather than have business absorb the cost of additional paid holiday? Elizabeth, go for it.
So actually, this is a really good example of a place where our leadership team was not able to find consensus, which is that we all agreed that there are some states where early voting deadlines and dates are changed and or organized for political reasons, but we could not find consensus around what kind of early voting schedule or change represented a political schedule versus a historical norm or practical concern state by state. It's not just a red-blue thing. A lot of blue states have different limits for early voting, and those are those for political reasons? I don't know. And we couldn't find consensus on that. So rather than trying to dictate what may or may not be a political reason, we said that we should have a national holiday for elections, which is something that we could agree on.
Okay, Irina.
I want to point to, and I think it's relevant here around things that we couldn't figure out and couldn't agree on, and particularly something where different states do different things. We have a recommendation that the National Governors Association have a bipartisan commission to send out, to come up with best practices for elections that they put out and publish, that states can look at. Are we doing the best practices around early voting? Are we doing the best practices around absentee ballots? And I thought that was a very creative idea that, maybe has some legs there, especially since we have some relationship to that institution, we as Braver Angels.
There's also a National Association of Secretaries of State, which I discovered, unfortunately, after we met in Boston. So it was not included in the report, but that would be another organization that develops best practices and could be worth different states looking to.
Okay. So next question. I believe that delays in announcing results contribute to doubts about election integrity. Why didn't the report encourage counting absentee ballots before Election Day?
Do you want me to go again, Rena?
Sure.
Liz, go for it.
So this was not an exhaustive effort to identify every potential good idea out there. It was a grassroots effort to capture the thoughts and ideas that Americans could agree on across the country. And counting absentee ballots ahead of Election Day was not one of those that came up. And that's the only reason that it's excluded. It's not that any of us thought it was a good idea or a bad idea, or that it shouldn't be considered. It simply didn't come up in any of the workshops that we ran across the country. And so it's not included in the report.
I will say something that came up at workshops but didn't reach agreement, but I'm just talking about workshops that I facilitated, moderated, and got to hear what was going on. Reds would occasionally say the results should come out on Election Day. All the absentee ballots should be in and counted, and that should be what's put out, and that's why there isn't trust in elections. And the truth is that we didn't reach bipartisan agreement on that.
Mhm, mhm.
So it's not that that wasn't considered by the grassroots, but it didn't come to a point of agreement.
Okay. Yeah, I think this is an important question because there are potential other solutions out there that either didn't come up or there wasn't enough consensus on. So this report is not a comprehensive attempt to solve all the issues, but to be true to two things: did it come from the grassroots, and was there bipartisan agreement on this? Okay. So the last question: will Brave Angels members and others have an opportunity to comment in detail and propose alternative solutions? And if so, will there be an updated version of the report? So another 13 years, guys, is what I'm hoping you're going to sign up for. Larry, I'm sure you're up for another decade on this.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of this report, like in Boston, this report is done. You know, and just like if we were the Boston Foundation or the Manhattan Institute or whatever it may be, to issue a report that's the report that they issued, again, annually, reports can build on themselves. They can improve and you win more information, that kind of thing. So we'll see what happens going forward. But there is also opportunity, and we welcome folks to send their comments on the report for us to take a look at. We do have a convention coming up in the summer, that kind of thing. But let me be clear: when it comes to this particular report, it is done. If there's something else, Walt will do it.
It'll be the Walt report.
Yes.
At that point. Yeah. And so it's a great question, and that's why I wanted to make sure I asked it, because there's some end to this process, and then there will be the future. Okay. But this is not, and again, it goes back to what I said before. This is the work of a particular group of people, a couple hundred at the grassroots, and then a leadership group. It's the work of this group. It isn't like the Braver Angels document to be voted on by all the delegates of the convention, and then it's Braver Angels policy. This represents the work of the people who worked on it, and using Braver Angels process and encouragement to Braver Angels, and then it's done. It also, it's a good opportunity for me to say at this point that we're hoping, Brave Angels is hoping and actually planning to replicate this process with other issues. And so there is going to be a call going out for recommendations of issues that might lend themselves to red-blue consensus on solutions. And then at the convention this June, there'll be debate about which issue should be our priority for next year, and then a decision about one or two or whatever issues to use this process to see if we can reach the kind of consensus that you all have done. Having learned from your process, perhaps doing it even more smoothly, because the airplane would have, I know, Walt, the airplane would have been built and it's flown. And so that we this may be something we do frequently, and based on the efforts that you've done. So Walt, did you want to add something there?
I just hope that Larry and I can get together and give somebody some flying lessons.
Yeah.
So that they can build a plane too.
Yeah, exactly. And make it even better. There we go. Yeah, so the last question for you all, and then we'll have a few things to wrap up. How has this process, how has been this experience that you've been in for a couple of years now? How has this affected you? Okay, how are you different because of this? So I'm just going to arbitrarily start with Elizabeth.
I think it helped me really think through the implications and the process of good policy making with a really great group of people who were thoughtfully approaching it, but everybody has their own priorities. Everybody has their hills to die on that were sometimes in opposition to mine and sometimes not. And it was really, really great to hear first hear from a group of people all across the country um, about what they thought about elections. It was sometimes a struggle for me as someone who's worked in politics for a long time and struggles to keep my mouth shut to do just that. Uh, and just hear where people were coming from and understand what was motivating their perceptions and their understanding, even if I thought they were wrong. And then also to have those concerns in my head as I was thinking about what are my hills to die on, and what should and shouldn't go in the report, because I wasn't just representing my own thoughts and ideas. Really, what I was trying to represent were those things that I heard from Reds and Blues in workshops and in the task forces. So I think that that helped me really, it changed me because it helped me better represent other people in a way that I don't usually have to think about all that much. And also was just a really, really fun and constructive time of argumentation and constructive work with a fabulous group of people.
And you like argumentation, Elizabeth.
I do
Yes.
like argumentation.
Yes.
Yes.
It's wonderful. So Rena, how's it changed you?
Oh boy. I think that I feel a tremendous amount of pride that we had this vision. We didn't know what was going to happen. We had to think every step of the way, and we're volunteers. You know, we all put in so much time. So I feel a tremendous amount of pride that we did this. And it changed my feeling about Braver Angels, because I think previously I saw Braver Angels as a place for people to talk and get to know each other and change their perceptions of each other. But now I see that if we can do this, we can make some real contribution to the country in terms of policy. So I think that's a tremendously hopeful place about the organization, that we can do some work here that can really make some change. So, yeah.
Larry.
We all, what I learned from this was reminded that we are all born someplace, and we are we go through a certain learning process, if you will, in geography, to our families and that sort of thing. And we should be mindful of that. And what this process did for me was to remind me of that, and that there are other ideas. There are other ways of seeing the world, and that one should be careful, be clear about what you believe, yes, but be open your mind to other possibilities, that there are maybe different ways to get at a problem. And so how this really changed me was to recognize that I've got some fixed stuff in my head, right? You know, and I need to recognize that and be open to hearing and learning from others. And this group really helped me do that. I even went as far as to have my first and only cigar with my co-chair Walt McKee at the convention, 12 o'clock at night, and it was quite fun. But again, that was part of the opportunity to do something different with someone.
How did you like the cigar, Larry?
It was fabulous. Walt has nothing but the best.
Okay. Well, then we'll go right to Walt. So how has this affected you, other than getting people to take up smoking? How has this affected you?
I would say that this is the Braver Angels experience at a masterclass level. You know, I became, I had to, in this role, not only understand better the positions that other people held, but I had to come to learn more about why. You
Mm.
know, why did they feel it? What was the background? And and I now have that approach and that knowledge in me. It doesn't mean that I have to change all my positions on this or that, but it means that as a human, I feel I can walk amongst my fellow humans and be better and communicate better and show respect better. And if I want to offer something, I think it will be considered and respected better. And and then also, I will definitely second what Rena said about feeling like we're doing something special and good for America. I really think we did. It will take some work to get it in front of Americans in different positions who maybe can be inspired by it or informed by it. But I'm very proud to tell people what we did and who we did it with. This was a very high caliber group of people, and I'm humbled to have been asked to work amongst them.
And so while following up just a little bit more on next steps on what people can do, and I'd like to start that off by saying just this week I was reading in the Minneapolis Star Tribune newspaper about a county, a rural county in Minnesota that just being torn up around election trustworthiness issues. It's a mostly red county. And so it's not a red blue thing, but it's within the county. And the county commissioners in my state run the elections. And they're befuddled because with the dissension that's occurring, and they're worried about election workers and potential threats. I mean, so I'm reading that, and then I'm thinking, our Braver Angels group in Minnesota has a good relationship with the County Commissioners Association. And I want to get this report to them immediately because this is the kind of thing, and maybe we'll go do a common ground workshop there, Arena. Okay.
That's what I was going to suggest.
Yeah, a report, could point to something. But we have a prior relationship with county commissioners. We have the support of their association, and we have a process and we have a document that I think could be of use. So I just wanted to mention that as something that just occurred this week, that because we're coming up to this election and it's going to be hot, unfortunately. So other sort of reminders of take homes, Walt.
Well, I would say seriously consider going to our website. Just go to a browser and type in Braver Angels Trustworthy Elections. You'll come to our website. You can get the document. You can read more about it. You can ask questions. And you can also learn about how to become more involved in the future. I would highly recommend, the way I got involved in the first place is that a friend of mine said, hey, they're looking for Republicans to be in this workshop down in Virginia. Join a workshop, get to be closely related with people who aren't exactly like you. One of the first meetings I went to in Braver Angels, I was sitting around actually in Rena's living room, and a friend of theirs who's a college professor, and he sat there and he looked at me, and this was a man easily 55, 60 years old, and he said, at work and at home and in my neighborhood, I do not know a single Republican. I was astonished, but I said, I'm glad that you see that, and now you can find some. Not because you have to be like a Republican, but to be a well-rounded American who can think more outside of the box, because I don't think any of us want what comes from one-party democracy. That's as big a risk as anything. But I would really suggest that people, if they're intrigued by this, go to our website and start branching out. See if there isn't what we call a local alliance, which is kind of like a Braver Angels club in your area where you can participate in workshops and get to know other like-minded Americans. And when I say like-minded, interested, curious, intellectually curious, wanting to be positive.
Okay, all right. And I remember sitting next to you at that very first workshop that you were in Virginia in 2017. So
You had to tell me to calm down.
I did. I had put my hand on you a few times, but look how far you've come along, Walt. I didn't have to stop you even once tonight. Okay. Brina.
I think that our Zoom managers have put in the chat a link to the website.
Mhm.
And also at the bottom of the website where we talk about the campaign, there's a email that you can press or copy into your email account, and you can send us comments, suggestions, questions, and that way we keep an open communication and dialogue with our committee.
And Bill Carberry, who has been, you know, kind of a linchpin of helping this move along. Yeah, it just wants to remind everybody that over the next couple of weeks on the webpage, there will be increasing ideas about how to get involved. We've just sort of touched on some of those. So look for those over time. Not only look at the report, but stay active with that website about how we could all get involved. I just mentioned one at my local level. You can send the report out to lots of people.
What's going to come on the website is it'll say reach out to your local media.
Mhm.
We're creating a how-to sheet
Mhm.
that will go with each one of those ideas we have. Reach out to your media, connect with a politician. There'll be a how-to that alliances and individuals can check with that will be coming up on the website.
And for example, the article I saw in our local newspaper, all of the journalists have their email available. You could send them a link to that website and the report. So that's a journalist who you know is interested in this because they wrote about it. That's one of the things I've learned over the years, not just some journalist, you know. You could do a search and see in your community who's in the last few years, who's written about elections, and send it to them. So there'll be lots of tips. So this has got to be a collective effort. You guys have, you know, you're passing the baton now to the rest of us with a great process and a great product, and it's up to all of us now to take it to the next steps. And so I'm so pleased to have been part of this conversation with you all. Both the this combination of a great process of real thinking through issues and the heart involved that you brought to this. So grateful to you all, and grateful to you all who have been watching in and listening in. And we encourage you to just take the ball now and start run with it. And we'll say goodbye to you, and you can log on out and enjoy the rest of your evening.